On February 28, 2026, America launched its first real drone war, and within days, its billion-dollar defense systems were being outsmarted by machines that cost less than a used car. The Pentagon had spent decades preparing for this moment, but 4,000 kilometers away, a country most people had written off had already solved the exact problem America was now facing, and nobody in Washington wanted to admit it. On February 28, 2026, America launched its first real drone war. Within days, its billion-dollar defense systems were being outsmarted, not by enemy jets, not by warships, but by machines that cost less than a used car. Imagine this, a $3 million interceptor missile fired at a $2,000 flying target. That's not a hypothetical. That's what was actually happening in the skies over the Gulf. The Pentagon had spent decades preparing for a war against nations. Armies, navies, air forces. What it wasn't ready for was a war against price tags. And somewhere 4,000 kilometers away, a country most people had already written off had been fighting this exact battle for 4 straight years. Nobody in Washington wanted to admit it, but the answer to America's problem wasn't sitting in a Pentagon lab. It was sitting in a trench. While the world focused on headlines, Ukraine had been quietly fighting a different kind of war. No real air force, no unlimited budget, just 4 years of forced innovation against wave after wave of Shahed drones fired by Russia. Here's the paradox: the poorest military in the fight became the world's leading expert in stopping the world's cheapest weapon. Picture a farmer's truck retrofitted with a .50 caliber machine gun, taking down a drone that had already slipped past multi-million-dollar radar systems. Crude, cheap, effective. This wasn't theory, this was survival, tested night after night over Ukrainian cities, and it was about to become the difference between life and death for someone else entirely. 8,000 kilometers away, in a war Ukraine wasn't even part of. Back in the Gulf, the reality was setting in. Iranian Shahed-style drones were slipping through, hitting bases, killing American soldiers. The system built to stop missiles was struggling against machines built to be disposable. Here's the math that should terrify any budget officer. Firing a top-tier interceptor at a bottom-tier threat isn't just inefficient, it's a losing formula. Run out of interceptors, and you're defenseless against the next wave. So Washington did something it rarely does. It admitted it needed help. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed it to the Senate. American personnel were being sent to Ukraine to learn drone warfare from a country the US wasn't even fighting alongside. The world's most funded military, quietly asking a war-torn nation for a crash course in survival. But knowing you need help is one thing. Learning it fast enough to matter, that's another story entirely. What American forces learned wasn't just tactics. It was a whole new system of thinking. Layer your defenses. Cheap interceptors handle cheap drones, so expensive systems stay reserved for real threats. Train dedicated units, not generals, but operators who live and breathe drone combat. Build AI that filters the noise and spots the swarm before it hits. Imagine an assembly line of hard-earned knowledge, Ukrainian trial and error, shipped straight into American doctrine in real time. But every day this transfer took, more bases stayed exposed. The lessons were arriving. So were the drones, faster than anyone expected. Here's where the story widens. Iran's drones and Russia's drones aren't just similar. They come from the same shared technology pipeline between Moscow and Tehran, which means Ukraine wasn't just fighting Russia for 4 years. Without knowing it, Ukraine was preparing the entire world for Iran too. This is the uncomfortable truth. Authoritarian states are no longer fighting alone. They're functioning as a live research network, testing weapons in one war, exporting the lessons to the next. If the weapons are shared, how much further does this web really extend? By the 8th consecutive night of US strikes on Iran, the real scoreboard was becoming impossible to ignore. American casualties, strained Gulf alliances, oil markets swinging with every wave of attacks. The Strait of Hormuz, a lifeline for a fifth of the world's oil, hanging in the balance. Picture the numbers nobody puts on a press release. Interceptors fired versus drones stopped. Dollars spent versus lives saved. Was America actually closing the gap, or just managing the bleeding while it caught up? This wasn't a solved problem. It was, and still is, an ongoing race. The war would eventually pause, but the lesson it forced wouldn't. Zoom out, and this story stops being about Iran. It becomes proof of something bigger. Battlefield's tested doctrine now matters more than budget size. A 4-year war fought by one of the poorest militaries on Earth just rewrote how the richest military on Earth prepares for its next fight. The world's most expensive defense system had to learn from one of history's most desperate wars just to survive its own. And that raises the real question: Taiwan, North Korea, wherever the next Shahed-style threat appears next, will the lessons already be there waiting, or will another nation have to learn the hard way all over again?